And I want to introduce LeAnn, who is a very dear friend, and she's also a Shining Light mom. She is someone who has her own foundation. When her son Andy transitioned, she started the Andy Hull Sunshine Foundation, and she's also now an author, and her book is amazing. It's called How to Live When You Want to Die, and it's really uplifting. The title is kind of sad, but it's such a good title to for this time that we're living in right now. And I think that all of you will be very inspired by what LeAnn has to say. So welcome, LeAnn.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm really excited to be here and share. It is an uplifting book, and the title is takes you back a little bit, I guess, but I really wanted to be real. I really wanted to for anybody to identify with those raw feelings that I'm sure that we all had, whether it was just at the very beginning or whether it's still now, years afterwards, whatever that was. I just wanted to be really clear about how we all feel and how we can, from that terrible moment, move forward. So I'm so thankful. Gosh, Elizabeth, I mean, I'm sure that we can all say this, that I don't know where I would be without Elizabeth and without helping parents heal. Truly, I feel that it was an essential component of saving my life. And if not just saving my life in the physical sense, saving my life in a much broader spiritual sense. Because while I might have still been here from a physical standpoint, I'm now not only just alive on the planet, I'm alive all through me in a spiritual, emotional, just a vibrant, amazing way that I never thought was possible. So, and it's funny because when I first met Elizabeth, I thought, oh my gosh, what is wrong with this woman? You know, she was just so happy and she just exuded joy and love. And honestly, I couldn't relate with it, but something deeper and bigger than myself, I think, pressed me forward and continued to make me want to come and be in her presence, be in the presence of the other parents, and surround myself with an energy that I'd never really experienced before. So let me back up a little bit, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself and about Andy and where I come from. You know, so many of you that are here right now, you know my story, but I know there are a lot of other parents that don't know my story and don't know who I am and where I came from. So just a quick little background on me, and then we'll just move forward, because I think that's what is most amazing, is not so much what was behind, but what is here now and where I'm headed. So I've been married, May 31st, I will have been married 40 years. So a really long time, and that's just such a blessing in my life. And Clay, my husband, is here in the meeting, so I'm really excited about that. That's one of the things I never thought was going to happen. So that's a blessing that's happened later on in the journey. We have 4 kids. 2 boys that are military sons, a daughter who is a nurse, and then our youngest son, Andy, is in heaven, and he moved to heaven when he was 16 years old after completing suicide, and that was 7 years ago. So, you know, the rest of my background, I owned a construction company for 28 years, and so writing a book and the journey that I'm on now has absolutely nothing to do with what I did in the past. However, everything that I did in the past provided a platform and gave me tools that I could use now in my journey forward. So I think that, interestingly enough, we have all been, whether you want to say it or believe it, been prepared for this by our lives, that we can draw upon all of our strengths that we've been given to move us forward. And for some of you that are newer in this journey than I am, I do want to acknowledge the fact that, again, it's been 7 years for me. And I never, ever believed that I would be where I'm at now in year 1 or year 2. I honestly didn't. So the things that I want to share today, they're some of the tools that I use. They're some of the things that helped me. And I want you to hear them, and I want to share them with you, because I truly believe that you too, wherever you're at in this journey, that you can find a place that isn't filled with pain and grief and sorrow, and you can move to that level without leaving your child behind. And I think that that was one of my biggest fears, and that's such a disconnect with grief, is that sometimes we're afraid to let go of the grief because we're connecting it with our child. And so I'm hoping to show some things to you today that may allow you to understand you can hold on to your child and let the grief flow out of you, and let it go. Because once you've let it go, truly there's so much more room then to share the joy of your child and have this relationship moving forward. So my 3 older kids are quite a bit older than Andy was. My oldest son is 39, and then my daughter's 37. I have another son that's 35, and then Andy, he would be 24 on April 10th. So there was an 11-year difference between our youngest son and Andy. So it was kind of like raising an only child. We had this family unit, and then we had oh my gosh, we're going to have another baby. And I'm so thankful for that blessing, but it definitely, was challenging at first when we found out that we were going to start this whole journey all over again. Where would I be without him? I don't know. And I would not trade what has happened for us in a second, just because in order to have, I would never have wanted to miss the blessing of Andy if it meant that I wouldn't have to experience the pain. I would take that pain a million times over, because I got to have that gift of my child, and I continue to have that gift with him. So Andy was just a real blessing in our life. He was a gifted athlete that came along a little bit later as he got older, but even as he was 7, 8, and 9 years old, it became evident that he was a gifted athlete. He was one step away from being an Eagle Scout before he passed. He was a youth leader at church, lots and lots of friends. He was an avid baseball player, a left-handed pitcher, being scouted by lots of professional sporting team like the Dodgers, the Kansas City Royals. His pitching coach was the Kansas City Royals pitching coach. So he was truly gifted as an athlete. But most importantly, all of his characteristics, his nickname was Sunshine, because that is what he gifted the world with, was his sunshine. And he truly brought that to anybody he came in contact with, and most certainly to our family. He left an imprint of sunshine in us that's indelible and will last a lifetime, that we now are able to continue sharing. Just because he's not here in the physical sense doesn't mean his sunshine isn't. So it flows through myself and my husband and my kids, my grandkids. His sunshine is ever present now, and maybe even has less limits on it than when he was here in the physical sense, because he's expanded beyond that. That's a really mind-blowing thing for me to say. So my background, though, comes from an evangelical Christian. And my kids were raised that way, and we spent every Sunday at church, Wednesdays at church. The kids were at youth camp in summers, youth camp in winters, and so we were really entrenched with the traditional fundamental Christian values. And I knew that from that, well, let's say, I can honestly tell you that I'm not sure I would say that I knew. I believed that there was heaven, and that we were all going to heaven after the end of our physical life. But that belief structure for me, and not for everybody, because and so the things that I'm going to say today, I want to be clear, these are just my experiences, and they come from my belief structure and the things that I've used and had to move through. So this doesn't necessarily ring true for everybody. So I hope you'll pull out the little morsels. You may not resonate, everything I say may not resonate with you, but there may be some little morsels in there that you're going to be able to pull out and go, man, I could use that, or I could try that. That's what I hope. So for me, my faith really created a large amount of fear in my life. And everything that we did, from my perspective, going to church and wanting to make sure we were all saved, was from a fear base that if we didn't do those things, we weren't going to heaven. And so that was when Andy passed, that very first night, I can honestly tell you that that was one of my first concerns was, oh my gosh, is my kid going to heaven because he completed suicide? And in some spiritual walks of faith, there are beliefs that that's a sin, that you do not go to heaven. And so that scared me. But it's interesting that even with that thought going through my head, I knew instantly that Andy was in heaven and that he was okay. And I was struck by that sense of confidence. I wasn't worried about it anymore. And it was almost like at that moment, if my fear then had been released, because I think for most of us, we can say that losing your child is probably one of the biggest fears that we have as a parent. And we do everything we possibly can to make sure our children are safe and protected, and we're giving them the best education, we're keeping them safe from harm. And so losing your child, it's like the ultimate, I think it's like the ultimate tragedy from my perspective. It's the ultimate trauma for a parent to experience. And so once we've experienced that, in some senses, it's freeing, because we're no longer afraid of that what we feared most has now happened. And from this moment forward, then it is up to us to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to live, because you can't change what's happened. So there were some really pivotal things that happened early on in my journey. And so the book is called, like we talked about, How to Live When You Want to Die. And I want to read you the back cover of it, because it summarizes what it's about. It's not a memoir of Andy. And I've read some people's other books that have just recently been released about suicide, and they're very, very descriptive about what has happened. My book does not do that. I don't feel that any of us need to be re-traumatized, because we can do that with each other by going through those details. And this book doesn't do that, because my goal was never to trigger any kind of trauma that's sitting there. My goal is to help you immerse and move through that trauma to another level. So while the title's real, the words are helpful. So the back of the book, it says, it's a path back to hope for those struggling with hopelessness. And so I really wrote it not just for people who had lost children, but for anybody that's experienced a life trauma, because it's all a matter of perspective. If you haven't lost a child, then going through a divorce is probably the ultimate trauma you could experience, or facing bankruptcy or an infidelity or any of those other things that until you've experienced what we've experienced, other people can't relate with that. But in their lives, they have experienced as much trauma as we have, because it's a matter of perspective. That's what they've gone through. And so I wanted a book that would reach into a multitude of people's lives, not just people who had lost children. In How to Live When You Want to Die, LeAnn Hull recounts her heartbreaking experience of losing a child to suicide and the subsequent discovery of a purpose-driven conviction to spread love, inspiration, and encouragement to others. Her message strikes a welcome chord for anyone struggling through loss or trauma of any nature. Andy Hull was a great student, a star pitcher scouted by Major League Baseball teams on his way to becoming an Eagle Scout, and was dearly loved by his friends. Andy's 2012 suicide at the age of 16 sent a piercing thunderbolt through the hearts of thousands of people, his family, his friends, and his community. How to Live is candid about the immense difficulties she and her family encountered after her son's death. Her husband's cancer diagnosis, the loss of friends, and the estrangement of another one of her sons all tested her resolve. Her steadfastness not only helped her to reinvent herself in the face of such adversity, but also has given her the patience and drive to carry on her mission to help others become hopeful. Suzanne Wilson, if any of you know of the medium Suzanne Wilson, she wrote on the back of my book, LeAnn Hull gently takes readers through the nuanced yet richly rewarding layers, I love that, of her healing journey, because it is layers and layers. After the physical death of her beautiful son, Andy. If you've ever grieved, or if you are grieving now, please read this book as soon as possible. So, Suzanne Wilson, which was such a strange event to happen in my life, was the first medium that I reached out to 40 days after Andy passed. And so at the beginning of the book, I added in my book, because as I continued my journey, I encountered hundreds and hundreds of other children who had died by suicide. And what I knew from my experiences with helping parents heal is that we all needed to feel connected to each other and to our kids and to each other's kids. And it also gave me great comfort to know that Andy is connected with all of these amazing kids over there. That is something, gosh, I honestly feel like shaking right now, because it gives me such energy and such joy to think about what amazing things he and all of our kids are doing every day there. My belief structure from church didn't allow me to even imagine that heaven could be such a vibrant, filling, full of love and mischief, as I'm sure so many of our kids continue to do. You know, they're still themselves there. And I think they're just doing some of the same things that they did here. And I love to think about that. One of the things that I remember so clearly about Andy was we had a big flood here in 2010, 2 years before he passed. And it was like a microburst. And I was at work, and the microburst had happened right in our neighborhood. And we were watching on our computers the flood notices, and on one of the computer screens we were watching, there was a helicopter overhead. It was one of the newscasters, and they were zooming in on these crazy kids that were floating down the flooded wash. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what kind of parent lets their kids out in the middle of a rainstorm like this? And what kind of crazy kids? And all of a sudden I went, oh my gosh, that's my crazy kid floating down the flooded waters in Anthem. And while I don't think that was the wisest thing for him to do, I do know that that's who he was, that's who he is. And if there are floods in heaven, I'm sure he's probably still boogie boarding down them as well. And I find comfort and joy in that. It makes me laugh and smile. So the book, I began writing the book. People have often said to me, well, LeAnn, writing your book, it must have been very cathartic for you to write your book. Like writing it was my way of processing my grief. And in actuality, that wasn't the case. I didn't start writing my book till year 3, the summer of year 3. And at that point, truly, the catharsis had already happened. And so my writing the book was about what had happened and how I got to where I was now. I remember very early on at one of the first meetings that I attended at Helping Parents Heal, I ran into Mark Ireland there. And Mark Ireland, along with Elizabeth, are the two co-founding members of Helping Parents Heal. And Elizabeth, to me, it was hard for me to reach out to her because she was like this earth angel. And I struggled with being able to identify with where she was at from an emotional standpoint. And so it was challenging for me to connect. But like that movie, When Harry Met Sally, and we all see them when we see her and she's faking the joy and sex, we all wanted what she had. And that woman sitting next to her wanted what Sally had. Well, I wanted what Elizabeth had. I honestly didn't believe I could ever attain it, but I wanted it. And I knew that if I wanted that, then, and I didn't have the tools that I wasn't equipped with them. I had some tools, but I didn't have enough. Then I had to continue to put myself in a place where I could either absorb them, learn them, practice them, and reinforce them. And if I didn't do that, then I was going to be stuck where I was. And I didn't want that. More importantly than anything else, I did not want to continue to feel that gut-wrenching, life-destroying pain and grief that was consuming my life. I didn't want that. And so I asked Mark Ireland, I said, Mark, tell me, when will I start to feel better? And I've been hesitant because I meet a lot of new parents, and I'm hesitant to even share with them that information, to give them any kind of date, because those dates vary from person to person. Everybody's experience in this journey is different. It's your own journey. And so the time frame that it was for Mark is going to be different than it was for Elizabeth. It's going to be different for me. It's going to be different for Anne, for Carol, for Lisa. It's different for all of us. Everybody has their own particular way of journeying, and it's in its own perfect time frame. But for me, he told me, and it gave me hope instead of scaring me, because it gave me a time frame that it was a target. And I'm the type of person, that's my natural personality. I want a target. Give me something to work towards. Some people don't like that. For me, that was going to work. And so I'm not even going to tell you the time frame he gave me, because I don't want to project that for you. If you're new in your journey, if you're in year one, if you're in month one, I do not want to tell you that it's going to be 1 year, 2 years, 3. I don't want to tell you that, because that could be limiting to you. The length of time that it took me, it could take you a month. So truly, I believe that this journey is entirely, and there have been some people that have said that they don't believe this. So what I'm going to say here, again, this is just my beliefs. I believe that you have the ability to choose 100% going forward what that looks like for you. That we have choices on what we're going to do with what has happened to us. We absolutely cannot change what's happened to us, but we have 100% control of how we respond to it. And that's up to you to do that and to use the tools. And like I said, I had some, but they were tools that I used that were going to help me, that had helped me maneuver through my journey up until this point. And so I'd never lost a child before. So I knew I needed to acquire more. And that was going to come from some of the people that had already experienced that. And I wanted to take some of the tools that they had and try to implement them into my life. Interestingly enough, some of those tools that I used in the first year, I felt like didn't work. And so I would repeat them and reuse them. And year 2 and year 3 and year 4, I would continue to reuse tools. And every time that I did that, I found actually a different kind of outcome. For those of you who have a religious foundation, I can relate it to that. I read the Bible front to back over and over again. I mean, dozens of times I have read the Bible from cover to cover. And I would turn the pages down each time, each year, whenever I'd read it, I would turn the pages down, or I'd outline something that I felt resonated with my life. And then the next time I got ready and I would read through it, I found it interesting that I'd look at those pages that I'd turned down, or those places that I'd underlined, and I was kind of dumbfounded, like, wow, I wonder, they didn't really relate to me now. It was interesting that I thought, well, I wonder why I underlined those before I turned that page down, because now I'm going to turn down a different page and I'm going to underline a different verse, because in that year, or however long it was, I'd become a different person, and I had grown, or maybe not even grown, but I'd evolved and I'd changed, and I'd encountered other things in my life that were going to and I was going to utilize then different verses or different chapters of that book. The same is true for all of our books that we've read. So some of the first things that I did the very first year, I read 80 books. 80 the first year. And I know, because I work with a lot of new parents, and I hear it all the time. I can't read, LeAnn. I can't focus. I can't remember. I can't concentrate. That doesn't work for me. I get it. I couldn't either, because to a certain degree, we do all have a level of PTSD in varying degrees. And that PTSD, my oldest son has extreme PTSD, so I'm very aware of those symptoms. And those symptoms are lack of ability to focus, lack of ability to concentrate. Even your eyes, they're blurry. There's a lot of physical things that happen to our body from the trauma that we've experienced. And that translates into our brain as well. So our brain is not functioning well. I used to tell people that my train had left the station without me. And I had to wait for a little bit until my train got back, because I had no idea what I was talking about. So I understand that those sentiments are real. They are real symptoms. The difference is that didn't stop me. It meant that I might have to reread a paragraph or a sentence 5 times. It might mean that I would have to put the book down, take a walk around the block, pick it back up again, and try again. It didn't stop me just because it was a roadblock. It meant I had to retrain my brain to maneuver around the roadblocks that were going to be continuously put in front of me in this new journey. Because my body wasn't responding well, my brain wasn't working well, and I had to take control of what was happening here, or else I just become a passive participant in whatever happens to me. And that's not my natural personality. For all of you who are my friends, you know that to be truth. You know that I'm a control freak. You know that I like to be in charge. So that's my natural personality. For some of you, that's not your natural personality. And so you're going to respond from the trauma with your natural personality and acquire tools that fit within that general format. But you can fight this, and you can direct it regardless of your natural personality. Mine just happened to be maybe a little more in your face, or a little more compulsive, obsessive, whatever that is. You know, I'm a pretty driven person, and so I wanted to be in charge of this journey. I wrote some notes. I put some notes down that I wanted to share with you guys. The power of the mind. One of the chapters is called The Power of the Mind. I felt that it was really important to make sure that with all of the pain and the grief that we were experiencing, that I was experiencing, that I would stop in those moments and validate any moment where I felt a degree of reprieve, relief, where I even felt like maybe there might be a smile. But that meant that I couldn't ignore those moments, that I had to reinforce them, because in those first stages, we're so immersed and so overwhelmed by the grief that we have to find some ways of stopping and blocking that thought process. That's what my book reading did. I want to be clear about the books that I read too. I did not read books on suicide, on depression, on grief. I did not read any book on grief. I had people giving me the 5 stages of grief till I was blue in my face. And I did not read them, because I don't know about you, but for me, I could go through all 5 of those stages in an hour and be back again to go through them again. So it was not a progressive, well, I'm here, I'm at stage 1, and now I'm ready to go to stage 2. That did not happen for me. Maybe it's happened for you, but that didn't. I was so jumbled up. And sometimes that was really disconcerting for me, because I thought, well, gosh, I'm backsliding. All that progress that I thought I was making, and I'm back to ground zero again. And that was depressing for me. So I thought, rather than me labeling and defining what stage I'm at, I wanted to recognize and honor the journey that I was on, whatever that looked like, and that then I had the power to alter those moments and transform them at any given moment. In the deepest, darkest moments of grief, when I didn't want to live, I had the power to stop that. And so some of the things that I literally did was, I would say to myself, when you're so clogged with the sadness over the loss of your child, or you're reliving those moments afterwards, I would literally say out loud, stop, LeAnn. Because just verbalizing those words, it's giving your brain a command. It's an outward command, and your brain can't do all those things all at once. So it literally, for a second, it'll stop that progression of pain and grief just by saying stop. And it puts you back in the driver's seat, and then you have to fill it. So you have a void when you've told your brain to stop. Then you have to be sure what you're going to fill that back up with. So I wrote here, with the passage of time, certain moments have become so precious and memorable to me. I remember images and events from my life now as if I'd taken a snapshot of them with the clearest of lenses, more beautiful, vivid, colorful than ever before. It was almost like I could see differently than I'd ever seen before, even in the midst of my darkest sorrow. These days, I noticed the color of the sky and the shape, the movements of clouds in ways that I'd never done before. I don't know about you, but I'm constantly looking at the clouds, and I'm looking outside and I'm seeing things. I'm seeing the new growth on our trees right now because spring has sprung, and the trees have that really vibrant green. It's different than the summer green, but I see it in a way that I didn't see before. Most days, the radio is playing in my truck, Andy's truck, because I drive Andy's truck. The windows are rolled down, and I'm living right here, right now, in this moment. I'm not living back where I was. I'm not living in the future, just this moment. And even though I still miss my son, I often realize that at this specific time, on this specific day, I'm feeling peaceful, joyful, and appreciative of all my surroundings. I don't feel the urge to hurry my life along or do anything else other than to just drive down this road, reveling in these moments of pure beauty and peace. Oh, how I love that inner calmness when it shows up. It didn't show up very often, but when it showed up, one of the most important things that I could do now is to stop and validate that wonderful feelings and etch them into my memory as another moment to cherish. Carpe diem, seize the day. Note that it is a verb, an action, not a reaction. So much of this journey, I believe, is an action and not a reaction. It can be, and that's your choice. Because if we're leaving it all up to just reaction, then of course, we're all just going to drown in our sorrows. But with that, replacing and validating those moments, you begin then to rewire your brain. You begin to reroute your thinking. You begin to create a new today that's not based, of course, it's colored by the past, but it's not driven. It does not have to be driven today by what has happened to us with our children. There are some other things that I want to share with you. When I went to see The Medium, one of the titles is The Medium, and that was Suzanne Wilson. And I think that most of you probably have had a reading. If you've not had a reading, I do encourage you to have one. And I want you to understand that there are good readings and bad readings. And just because someone's a medium doesn't mean they're not human. And that they have their own days that probably, the information that they're receiving could be colored. I'm thankful that my first readings were really good. And they were with Suzanne Wilson. And she said something, Andy said something through Suzanne at the very end of the reading. It couldn't have been any more clear to me that I was speaking with my son. I couldn't tell anybody because I would have been excommunicated from my church. Anybody that, and frankly, I don't have many friends from my church anymore. My church has washed their hands of me. And that's just my religious journey. That doesn't mean that's everybody's religious journey. Some people have a great marriage with their faith and their spiritual journey. Mine was a little more difficult. So I didn't have any support from anybody that was faith-based around me. But I knew that while I thought there was heaven, I needed to know that there was heaven, and I needed to know where my son was. And at the very end of talking with Andy through Suzanne, Andy said something that paved my way forward. He said, "My mom is tough as nails, and she's gonna be fine." And while at 40 days after Andy passed, I didn't feel that way, I knew going forward that I wanted to do everything in my power to not only prove my son right, but to honor him in my life. That all of us want our children to be remembered. We want our children to never be forgotten by their friends or our family. That is one of the most important things. And you are your child's best representative. So your children live on through you besides their own spiritual journey besides you. Who you are is the best way for anybody to see who your child was and who your child is. And I did not want anybody to forget Andy, and I wanted them to see the sunshine. And so I knew then I had to figure out how I was going to create that sunshine when I didn't feel like it. So there's another chapter in here that was really important to me, and it's decisions versus emotions. So just like I said, I didn't feel the sunshine. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel joyous. I didn't feel like I was going to survive. I didn't feel like I could relate with Elizabeth, but I made decisions that were going to hopefully in the future put me in a position to where my emotions, my decisions would then, my emotions would be reflective of my decisions. So one of the things that I did after Andy passed was he was on the varsity baseball team. And so Andy passed in December and baseball season starts in January. Andy was a junior the year he passed. And the baseball team, as was so many people, you know, as the people around your children, you know, everybody's affected. And it impacts so many families and friends. It impacts a world, what has happened to us. But I knew that these kids, that other people were watching me. Other people are watching you. You have an ability, and I'm going to sidestep here. I want to tell you that in some senses, so this is really off track here, but in some senses, we are better prepared to deal with what's going on in our world than people that haven't experienced what we've experienced. And you have an opportunity to be a light unto the world right now, to share a level of calmness and joy and love that comes from a deeper place than a physical place. And this is what our children have gifted us with, is that gift to give to the rest of the world. And if you can reach the place where you see this as a gift instead of a curse or something terrible that's happened to you, I'm not saying that it's not sad and that it's not devastating. I'm just saying you can flip it so that you can show the world and use your children to show the world how to maneuver through today. That's a large side note. But anyway, I attended all of the baseball games that first season after Andy passed. I got to tell you, that wasn't easy. It was even difficult's not even the appropriate word to describe what that was like, to walk to that baseball field every game and know that I'm not going there to see Andy. But that was a decision that I made rather than an emotional level, because I believed that I had the opportunity to impact a lot of other people going forward, how to handle challenges that come your way. And not just how do you survive losing your child, but how can you move forward? How can you live when your life has been devastated? And I knew these kids were watching me. They wanted to know, how is LeAnn going to survive this? How is she going to do this? So I had this gift that I could give to them if I chose. And I did. I showed up every game. And so I wrote about this here. I'll just read you a couple paragraphs. It was interesting to me because the moment the game began, the emotional cloud that I'd been under, it lifted just enough so that I could get lost in the joy of my favorite game. It was almost like I could watch myself as I was sitting there at the baseball field going, wow, I'm kind of free for this moment. And that taught me how to train my brain and how I could train my brain. Just enough so that I could get lost in the joy of my favorite game. My sunshine Andy was surely there with me that afternoon, shining his divine light and love upon me. I found myself cheering, screaming, hollering like all the other parents. How could I do that? And I wondered if the onlookers thought that my enthusiasm was as odd as I did. I worried that my mere presence would cast a shadow over whatever event I'd happened to attend. Maybe the other parents were wishing that I wouldn't show up because they saw me as something so sad, so that they could get on with their lives. I really had no idea, but I pushed those thoughts aside because I was there for the boys and for myself and for Andy. That process of making decisions to move forward, regardless of how I felt, proved to be critical in my learning about how much power and control I actually had over this journey. For the first few games, friends or family or both had escorted me, but as time went on, I found myself alone in this curious exploration of my human and mortal capabilities. It's amazing what we're capable of. I wish I could say, and I'm sure you would like to believe, that with time, these baseball games, everything became easier. But the truth is, it did not get easier with each passing game. The reality of my journey is that I made decisions not based on how I felt, but rather on how I eventually wanted to feel, and had been left up to my emotions, I would still be lying on the concrete where I'd collapsed upon hearing the day that Andy passed. If I had not made the decisions, I was going to be emotionally still laying on the concrete. I might not physically still be there, but every decision I made gave me more and more confidence that I had control over this journey. I want to read another quick chapter for you, and it's about my dancing. And I know some of you have heard me read this. Sorry. Thought I had it. Time to grow. Besides all the reading that I did, I continued to go to Helping Parents Heal month after month. And again, I didn't want to go. It's funny because after I would leave each meeting, I had a friend that she and I would go together, and we would both say to each other, we're never coming back, because we just couldn't relate with the joy and the happiness. And yet I knew, again, I didn't have the tools that were necessary. So I had to keep putting myself in a position. Gosh, I really want to find that chapter. Maybe if I just look up in the... Signs of Life, I found it. Okay, sorry, you guys. I think you'll be able to relate with this. After Andy moved to heaven, I woke up each day feeling like I was living the movie Groundhog Day. I would imagine we've all seen Groundhog Day, in which a weatherman finds himself caught in a time loop, reliving the same day over and over again. I would open my eyes, look around, and realize this nightmare had really happened to me and my family. How do I breathe? How do I live? How do I go on without my precious son? Every day I faced the same haunting questions and the same awful reality. Nothing would ever change. And I wondered, is it even possible for my day to have any other kind of beginning or ending than this? While my visit with Suzanne, the medium, helped, and all the meetings I was going to, I was still faced with the reality of my heart being shattered into more than 1 million pieces. I was severely wounded by my loss, and I felt every bit of pain and sorrow that one person could possibly feel. I looked like a walking zombie, barely able to go through the motions, shuffling my feet back and forth in an attempt to get through the daily efforts required for my survival. Then, one day, much to my surprise and amazement, as I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, I noticed my body moving slightly to the beat of the music that was playing on the radio. How dare I? Am I really going to allow myself to dance after losing my son? I felt like I was betraying myself. I was betraying Andy. Wasn't I supposed to be sad and grieving all the time? As I continued observing myself, something occurred to me. I must really want to live, or why else would I be dancing? Was it merely just a physical reaction over which I had no control? Or was it something bigger, deeper? Was this my soul crying out to survive, regardless of what my heart had to say about any of it? Like the fluttering wings of a baby bird as he learns to fly, I could feel the sensation of something new stirring in me. I should stop this display of life before anybody walks in on me, because I didn't want anybody to see me being joyful. I wanted people to see me being sad, because in my mind, I connected my sadness with the depth of the love that I had for Andy. I wanted people to know how terribly sad I was, because then they would know how much I loved him. That isn't true. You need to let that go. Then another more positive thought came to my mind. But as long as I'm standing here at the mirror, maybe I should fix my hair a bit, put on some makeup. I wondered what people might think of me if they saw me. Remember, LeAnn, I told myself, you aren't the first mom to lose a kid, and you haven't seen any other zombies out there lately, so life must go on after all. Anyway, maybe no one will notice if your appearance looks a little more presentable today than usual. And really, honestly, who cares what anyone else thinks? I was the one just hanging on by a thread while doing my very best to survive. Then the next day arrived, just as it had the day before. But this time I opened my eyes, brushed my teeth, fixed my hair, and once again, I danced to the music. What will be next? I wondered. Will I continue this crazy betrayal of my heart? What about the gaping hole that was still there? Was the song of my soul louder and stronger than the cry of my heart? Perhaps. Had the spell of Groundhog Day been broken? I sure hoped so. One of my favorite quotes is from Winston Churchill. The never, never, never give in. Never give up. There is such a connection in so many of our minds that I know for me, I was afraid when someone would ask me how I was in the first year, and I would tell them, I said, you know what, I'm not even going to tell you how I am, because honestly, I don't think you can handle how I really am. And they really didn't know how to respond. They didn't know how to help me. They wanted to, but they didn't. People just don't know how. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't love you. They just don't know how. And then that one moment when someone asked me how I was, and for a moment I stopped and I thought, wow. And I'm thinking this to myself. The fact that you're even thinking about this, LeAnn, is a little scary, because in the past, it was an automatic, you don't want to know how I am. I don't want to tell you that I'm fine, because that's not the truth. I wasn't fine. But in that moment, I was finally ready to say, I'm okay. And even hearing myself say that out loud startled me, scared me. Because that's almost like you're telling the world that you're going to be accountable and ready to move forward. And that's scary. It's kind of like quitting smoking. Not that I've ever smoked, but it's when you tell the world, I'm going to quit smoking, and you're afraid to tell anybody that you're going to quit smoking, because what if you fail? And you don't want anybody to see you as a failure. So it was kind of like that. I didn't want to tell anybody that I was okay, because tomorrow, if I'm not okay, I don't want you to think that I'm okay. I want to be able to be however I was. But I also recognized that I needed to validate that I was okay. And that the more that I did that, the more that I reinforced that I was okay, that was going to replace those moments of not being okay. And so I spoke it into existence. I validated it, whatever little moment came along, that moment of seeing beauty, that moment of feeling where the gut ache wasn't there just for a moment. I would take the time to say, I'm okay. I love you, Andy. I'm okay. I know you love me. And I spoke the words of love, replacing the words of fear and sadness. There are things that I tell some of the new parents that are they're on my never do list. Stop asking why, because 2 reasons. First of all, you're never going to get a satisfactory answer while you're here. The only answer we'll get is when we're there with our kids in heaven. And when we're there, it won't matter anymore. So there's no sufficient answer why right now. It's just torture. And I didn't want to torture myself. I never asked why ever from the moment that Andy passed. I said to myself, why not? Why not me? Do I think that it should happen? We always think it should happen to someone else. Why not me? I am prepared for this. I am up for this. I can do this. Don't ask why anymore. And the second reason you shouldn't ask why, let's just say that we're sitting here in our living rooms and you say, God, divine source, whatever your belief structure is, why did you take my child? Okay, and so then God says, you hear this booming voice like Charlton Heston, and he says, because blah, 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 blah. This is why. And you get this answer from God or divine source as to why this happened to you or your child. Does it make you feel any better? No. Because even the answer to that why doesn't change the fact that your kid isn't here. And so there's no sufficient answer. God needed him in heaven. God needed whatever, or God's going to use this for the greater good. Awesome. I can see that. I can see that I have the opportunity to use this for greater good, that I can take Andy's sunshine and magnify it out into the world with his help, with God's help. That didn't change that I miss him. And it doesn't make me not wish that it hadn't happened. So why is silly. And it's training your mind. Anytime that you start to want to go there, just say, stop. And then use some reaffirming words. So there are things that I knew, and those are the things that I reinforced. I absolutely knew without a doubt, I would have done anything for my kids, anything for Andy, anything to protect him. I would have done anything to prevent what had happened from happening. And I know he knows that without a doubt. And your kids know that you would have done anything to have them here with you. Your kids know that. And so I would reinforce that. Okay, I did, that's all I can do. Could I have done more? Are there things that I missed, especially because Andy died by suicide? The what, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Are there things? Of course. Of course there are. I'm human. I live in a world that's challenging. But in my best ability, in this moment, by who I am, did I do my very best? Yes, I did. And that's not a failure just because he's not here. The second thing is, do I absolutely know that Andy loves me? Yes. There's no doubt, even with suicide, That is not something he did to me. It is not something he did to his siblings. It is not something he did to his friends. I won't know exactly why he did that until it won't matter when I see him. So there's no sufficient information that I need other than to focus on the love. He loves me, I love him. End of story. It's all about love. What I do with that has the opportunity to change more than just myself. I truly have the opportunity to change hundreds and thousands of lives, as do you, because of the experiences that have happened to you. Do I sense Andy? Do I hear from him? Do I get signs from him? There are a lot of parents that get a variety of, some parents get lots and lots of signs. I don't get a lot of signs. I sense him. So I feel like this, sometimes it makes me laugh. And I know that that's him because there's truly no other reason other than this sense of silliness. And I'll find myself doing some things or mimicking some of the behaviors that he did. So looking for those signs became something that I was really compelled to do the first few years. I was hungry for them. I felt like I needed them. And then as time has gone on, that has shifted as well. And it's not that I don't want them, I just don't need them anymore. And that's because of the things that I did those early years, all of the foundation that I laid. We have a society that says we're so used to instant gratification. Just look at our challenges we're facing right now. I mean, we're facing that in the world of not being able to get the groceries, that we want today. But let's just say our phones don't work fast enough. We get a new phone or our relation, whatever that is for you. Going to the gym, that's a perfect example. We want this physical specimen, and yet we go to the gym and we go for a week and then we get disappointed or we get disillusioned. Well, that's not working fast enough, or that's not working, and so we quit. That's the key to this journey, is patience and persistence through the process. Those are the 3 P's. So the things that I'm talking about now that I did, and again, this was my journey, however long that took me. It took me 2 years before I experienced the results from all of the things that I did those first 2 years. That may not take you that long. It may only, like I said, take you a month. It might take you 5 years. So this is just my journey. But it took me 2 years of doing the same things over and over again without any result, but believing and continuing to put myself in a position to where I had hope by seeing Elizabeth, by being with Carol, by being with Lisa, by being with my friends, to where that I could see that there was hope. And that hope propelled me forward. And so I persevered through the process while I was being patient. And I continued to be repetitive in those things, reading the books, working on a mind control, controlling my thoughts. So one of the things that I did in my mind control, that sounds like a science fiction type thing, but that's how I look at it. So I stayed in my house for several years after Andy passed, and that's where Andy passed, was in our house. And so there are those emotional challenges, those triggers, those traumas were attached to that house, those images, those things that we can all connect to that take us right back to that ground zero, that day one, those triggers. And I knew that if I was going to stay in my house, I had to figure out how to manage those triggers, how to manage the trauma, how to manage my thinking, how to manage those images of what to do with them. How do I get rid of those thoughts that were ever present in my head? And so I did what I talked about earlier, where I would literally, as those images would start to come across like a movie playing in my head, I would tell my brain to stop. And that would stop that movie from playing, those images. And then you had that void. Remember I talked about that void. And so you have to replace that void with something that is life affirming and positive. So I picked an image, just one image that I had with Andy. And it's like a movie, it's a vignette. It's a story. It's a story long enough to replace that other story that's running through your brain that you want to get rid of, those images that are awful. So you have to have something that's long enough to replace that. So I picked one where Andy was pitching on the pitching mound, and it was literally 2 months before he passed. It was called the Junior Classic. And it's where these scouts all come out to watch these baseball players. And they have been watching these kids. So they have a list of kids that different scouts are going to come because they want to follow them. And so Andy had a long list of scouts that were there to watch him. So Andy's out there on the baseball, on the pitching mound. And it looked like something out of a movie because the scouts were behind the backstop with their radar guns, just like you see in the movie. And they were watching my kid pitch. And Andy was pitching lights out like I'd never seen him pitch before. And I was pacing because I was nervous for him because I knew this was a transformation. This was a moment that could transform his career. But I was pacing behind the behind the bleachers so he wouldn't see me and I wouldn't make him nervous. And when he got done pitching, he leapt off that pitching mound like he was a gazelle, like he was a deer, like he was this man cub, because he knew that he had just delivered the game of his life. He had just locked in what his future, he held it in the palm of his hands in that baseball, that moment, and he had delivered. It was unbelievable to watch him. And so I know that vignette that I play in my mind, just like I'm doing now, it gives me goosebumps. And so whenever I would start to have those bad images, I would say, stop. And then and sometimes I'd have to do that skit that I just told you, that vignette, I'd have to play it out loud in my head, whether I was driving, whatever I was doing, and I would stop and I would say that. Andy was on the pitching mound, and I would repeat that. By the time I got done, I had now moved myself from that physical place, those awful images, and I was on the pitching mound with Andy. And my brain was no longer locked there. After 2 years of doing that, replaying it and replaying it, I could describe the events of that day without it impacting me. I won't, because it could trigger you. It does not trigger me. It has no hold over me, no effect on me. I swear to God, it works. I am no longer there. I can't even stay there if I wanted to because I'm on the pitching mound, because that's where my kid is. That's where I want you to be. I want you to be where your kid, that moment, those joyous moments that you had with your precious child, replay that, relive that, and let your kid transform your life. But be persistent and be patient until the process is perfected. Those are my 4 P's. It was 3 P's before now, but now it's 4 P's. Patient and persistent through the process until you're perfected. And of course, I'm still a work in progress. But I can guarantee you, I promise you, with every cell in my being, I am no longer filled with grief. I am no longer held captive by sorrow and sadness and anger and loss. Those words I use to only describe, they don't describe me. And I want that for you. And I want to give you that power for you to know that you too can be there. It may not be through reading 80 books. It may not be through mind control. I don't know what it is, but I can tell you that if you don't have it now, it's your job to find it. It's your job to figure out where to get it. It is up to you, and you too can have it. I don't think there's anything that I want to my last words. Maybe the very last chapter. I'll read the very last chapter so that I can kind of summarize it for you. As I ventured, and this is at 18 months. The end of this book ends at 18 months after Andy passed. Now, my writing it, I finished it just this last year. It took me 3 years to write. I wrote it every summer for 3 years. But this is what I said at 18 months. As I ventured toward a new beginning, I was reminded of a saying that my beloved grandmother and mother would both often say to me. I carried the tradition forward, using it on my kids over and over again as they were growing up. I would say to them, bloom where you are planted, dang it. That's just my little add-on now. It was echoing in my memory banks again on this day, and I realized this might be something I would need to do. Just as I had done so many times in the years past, I needed to learn how to bloom today where I was planted. Our lives had forever changed, and I was now heading up to a town where I didn't know a soul except my husband, Clay. And I didn't know he was working out of state. And I didn't know what I was going to do with myself once I arrived. While I knew I was in dire need of good rest, I also knew that too much free time could prove to be detrimental. After some nurturing from my dear husband and some treasured books, I too would have to figure out how to rebuild my life, at least for the summer months ahead. 2 days later, I arrived at Clay's temporary home. After some much needed downtime, I headed out one morning for the local nursery to buy something symbolic of breathing fresh life back into my heart. Life had significantly changed, and it didn't look anything at all like I had anticipated. So I purchased a beautiful blooming rose bush to take back home with me to plant. And I would begin the process of finding new life for myself. On my way home, something caught my eye, and I felt a stir deep in my soul. The offices of the local newspaper located in between the nursery and our apartment were calling me quite loudly. My truck seemed to veer itself into the parking lot. Once I had parked, I boldly marched into the office of the newspaper editor-in-chief. Much to my amazement, he agreed to see me. And I'll confess, I nearly shocked myself when I heard myself asking him to allow me to write a weekly column for the paper. Now, this is not something that I'd ever done before, and yet I felt called to do it. Maybe you feel called to do something different than you've ever been called to do now. Maybe your heart is stirring and leading you in a new direction. Listen. He asked me what my column would be titled, and he asked me to send him a sample of my first week's musings. I drove home, smiling in silent reflection. After potting my brand new rosebush, I began writing my first ever weekly column for the Dickinson Press, aptly titled, Bloom Where You Are Planted. Just wait until you see all that has blossomed and grown out of that amazing summer that I spent healing in North Dakota. You truly can bloom after what's happened to you. You can be the most beautiful blossom. It can be a gift that you can give to the world. You can be that sweet smelling rose that's been born out of shit. You can offer up something and show others your strength, your resiliency, your beauty in the midst of trauma and tragedy. It's all up to you. Bloom where you are planted.
Thank you.